Okay, so from my point of view, when I think about public-private partnerships, I don't know how that benefits me. I also don't understand how that's different necessarily, because I think a lot of people see government as either taking away from opportunities for private organizations, or they see that private organizations maybe don't want to work with the government, or the ones that do are
Well,
dishonest. And
here's the thing. I understand your problem because you're absolutely right. It ultimately deals with trust, and the U.S. is uniquely a nation that is rule of law. If we have a contract, it binds both sides into performing something together. Most other lands outside of the U.S. are what we call rule of land. It's not that piece of paper. It's the relationship that matters. Here, I don't have to like you, know you, trust you. If you have a contract with me, you have to honor it. And therein lies part of the good and part of the bad. Because unfortunately, in governance, somehow we as a people have forgotten what our government is supposed to do for us and what it's not supposed to do for us. Governments do have an inalienable right to do what's called eminent domain, which has to do with, you know, acquiring land for the greater good of the people. But here in Texas, oddly enough, we don't really practice eminent domain. We actually practice a much more onerous form of land acquisition, and it's called condemnation. Under a condemnation, there's very little negotiation. If I want your land, I condemn it. And condemning it also brings with it usually a devaluation of your land that we've proved as a government that it's blighted or not useful, and we take it and do something with it for the government. I am appalled by that. You either do the in the form that we're supposed to take land, there is a negotiation, there is an opportunity for the landowner to get his land appraised by 3 different appraisers. The government uses 3 different appraisers, and the seller usually has the opportunity to pick whichever number he finds best out of the 6 appraisals, and that's eminent domain. I have always felt that outside of contractual law, a contract is usually best when it's mutually benefiting. So if it's going to be mutually benefiting, rather than either doing condemnation or, you know, the acquisition of land in that negotiation, I found that public-private partnerships are the way to do it. And public-private partnerships are just that. It's a partnership between the public entity, the government, and the private entity, Joe Citizen. And in public-private partnerships, they've actually have existed for decades. But for decades, they only laid in the realm of utilities, of how utilities were able to acquire land to build more utilities and finance it. But I found that, you know, the concept is still viable for things other than utilities. For instance, when I was charged with expanding our convention center from $500,000 to $1 million, along with that expansion came other needs. People that come, you're building a larger convention center to draw larger conventions, to draw more people. Well, those people have to get there somehow. More often than not, it's cars. Even if you have public transportation, what do you do with those cars? You have to find some place to park them. So when I was in charge of negotiating the build out, I also negotiated the build out of the garage. And I met with the owner of the land, and I asked him what were his dreams for it, what were his goals in the future. Maybe there's a way that we can retain that and the city still have use and everybody wins. And what we came up with was a public-private partnership where he retained ownership in partnership with the city. We would share benefit of it. The city would get the use of the lot. We would share some of the profit with him. So he wasn't losing anything. And the city and him were both gaining. And I think if we use that as a model, I really, really think that that type of negotiation is the way of the future for all large site development, because just the sheer starting cost of most projects have gotten so large, it's either going to put an extraordinary burden on the public with tremendously deferred gratification, or on the seller, he's going to really take a hit. So, like a contract's only as good as the people who intend to honor it. Whoever breaks the contract actually wins. So if you make it mutually benefiting, then there's equal reward and equal incentive for both to maintain the goodwill.